About forms. So, hands up, who's had experience with forms? Who's looked at a form? Who's built a form? Most of you. Okay, why are you here? What I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief overview of some forms, how they work, what the types are. Some of you will be familiar with that. We're going to build a search form, and then we're going to talk about some velocity as well, which is probably why some of you are here. For any of you who have been in some of my other presentations, you know I tend to leave a fair bit of time at the end of the session for Q&A. This one's going to be no different, so there'll be plenty of time at the end for us to talk through some of the stuff that I haven't covered that maybe you want to see. Anyway, we'll jump right into it. First off, how does our system handle forms? So eSeries has a built-in module called the Form Builder, and that's what's responsible for building all of your forms, allowing you to configure what fields are on the forms, how they work, how they look, and what happens when you submit them. The first thing that a form requires when you build it is an entity that it's based on. So you need to have some sort of base for your form to work off. Now that can be something that's fairly obvious. For example, if you're doing an add document form where you want to add a document to an existing case, then your form object in that sense is going to be document because that's what you're trying to add. If you want to do an update party form, then your object for your form object is going to be party because you want to update a party. Much the same way a case initiation form where you want to create a case, that's going to have a form object of case. That's probably one of the most critical first decisions you're going to make about what you want your parent entity on your form to be, because it's not always quite clear. You're going to make mistakes. We all do. I still make mistakes about my form entity. So the one problem with that is that if you do make a mistake, you can't change it. If you make a mistake and you pick the wrong parent entity, you've basically got to throw the form away and build again, start again. So it's often a really good idea to have a wireframe, even if it's just handwritten notes on a bit of paper, about what the fields are that you want to show on that form to accomplish what you want to do. If it's an add document form, then obviously you're going to need some document fields. If it's an update party form, a couple of party fields, probably some person fields like person, first name and last name and so on. And from that list of fields that you've got, work back to what you think is the best entity to go with, and then just start building it. And then when you get it wrong, inevitably you will, as I said, you start again and try again. So the form builder allows you to place elements onto the form in order to construct it. So the three most common types are entity fields, and that's where the types of the fields that are on your actual entity itself. So like I just said, the first name and the last name fields for a person entity, maybe a date filed field for a document entity, or a party type field for a party form. Those are the kind of fields that you put on. So they're your bread and butter. They're the ones that the users interact with, pick from the drop-down box, enter some text, that sort of thing. There's static text you can add as well. That's where you just want to add a piece of fixed text onto your form. Maybe it's a help note or a note at the top about when and when you shouldn't use this form. It's just a piece of static text. The user won't interact with it. You just want to display some information onto the form. And the third most common one is panels. And a panel allows you to group a block of either fields or static text into a logical group. A really good example of this is an address panel. Right? So let's say you've got an add party form or an update party form. You've got your address field, so you might have address type, address 1, address 2, city, state, zip, country, that sort of thing. That's a logical block of fields to go into an address panel. And it just allows you to group that. The nice thing about panels is that it makes it a lot easier when you're debugging somebody else's form, or you want to make a change to it. If they've got a nice grouping for some of the consistent or logical blocks, it's really easy to just look at that and go, for example, going on the address one, you had address 1 and address 2. If you want to add address 3, if someone's got that entire address block into a panel, it's really easy for you to figure out where you have to add it. If they haven't done that, you've got to sort through the form. If this is a big case initiation form, that can be a bit more difficult. So panels can really help with flow and layout of your form. Each of these elements that you add onto a form is called a form item. So a form will have many form items. It's pretty rare you'll only have one. So that's the main basis for a form in terms of its construction and how it's built. You have forms, and then you have your form items that you place onto it. Moving on, types of forms that we can build. You're all familiar with these, I suspect. Searches, which do exactly what you'd expect. They allow you to search in the database. An add form, which allows you to add something into the database. An update form, which allows you to update something that already exists on the database. So you want to change something about something that's already there. Headers and folder views. We've all seen the case, right? We all know the header is the bit at the top and the folder views are the ones that you see underneath when you're looking at a case. You're all familiar with that? Yeah, okay, cool. So those are your 5 types. You'll notice I haven't put case initiation on there. And the reason for that is a case initiation form is actually really just an add form. You're just adding a case to the system. That's really all it is when it comes down to it. We have to separate them out slightly for various technical reasons I won't go into, but if it boils down to it, a case initiation form is just an add form. These can be categorized into, or put into 2 large categories. There's forms that are used for submitting data into the system and forms that are used for viewing data from the system. Searches actually fit into both. You're not actually submitting data into the system in terms of updating any records, but you're having to submit to the system your search criteria. So you've done a search for a last name of Jones and you've hit search. That's actually submitting that data to the system, but then you're viewing data when you look at the results that come back to it. So that's one that actually fits into both categories. But add and update forms fit into the submitting data, where somebody's typing in some information onto the form, they hit save, that will actually submit that data and save to the database. Headers and folder views are just the ones that allow you to view data. Alright, so search form. Search forms are a little bit different to all the other forms in that you need to add fields into 2 separate categories, your search criteria and your search results. And often the case that the same fields will appear in both categories. A really good example of that is a case search. So if you want to search by case, I don't know, what are some of the fields you might use in your case search? You might use case type, you might use the filing date that it was on, and you might use the case number and the case name as search criteria. But you probably also want some of those fields into the search results as well, because if you search by date filed, and that's the only one you search by, when you get your results, you're still going to want to see case number and case name. So it's quite common for you to build a search where you've got some of the same fields on the search criteria and in the results. This more fits into best practices, but keeping your search forms tightly focused will really help with performance. Was anyone here in the session earlier today that Joe and Koshik did about system performance monitoring? I reckon there was a few faces from there, right? So that was when Joe went through that search form and was really showing how some of those entities and the joins you put into it can affect it. That's what it is here. Searching across multiple entities is bad for performance. We've seen someone who builds a case search form and they go, well, my users are saying they also want to search by party name. Yeah, and they also want to search by documents that may have been submitted on the case, and maybe hearings as well. That'd be really good if we could search all of that on one search form. So now all of a sudden I'm having to search case, party, person, documents, scheduled event, whatever else they put on there. And all of a sudden my search that used to run in half a second now runs in 20 seconds. So keeping your search forms tightly focused is a really good way to improve performance. It may feel a little bit clunkier to users to use because they now have to access 2 or 3 searches instead of just the one search they had. But trust me, when they're having to wait half a second for the results instead of 20 seconds for the results, they're going to be much happier, usually. All right, so let's jump out and build a search form. So has everyone seen the forms page in here? So everyone looks at, has to look at how to look at forms and how to look at edit them and so on. All right, cool. I'm going to create a new search. I'm going to ask, anyone got a particular search they want me to build? Case, party, document? Anyone got any suggestions? Nope? Okay. In that case, let's build case search, because that's easy. All right, so that's my root entity. Because I'm building a case that's going to, a search that's going to search on case is going to be my root entity. We've got to give it a name and a unique code. I'm just going to call this test for now. Right. So now we're in the form builder. This is where we start to add form items onto our form. There's a whole bunch of attributes and settings at the top here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time and go into them in detail. If you've got questions about any particular one, sure, let us know later on. We do have a form builder configuration guide that's about to be released on our documentation site, which will go into a lot of detail about these, so we'll give you some information about them. So that's coming pretty soon. I've seen the drafts. I know the guide is finished. We just have to put it up onto the documentation site. But we'll move down now to here, and now we have our form items panel. So that's where we're going to start to add our individual form items that we want. And you can see, as I mentioned before, our search form is split into two columns, our search criteria and our results. The panel down the bottom here, this is what allows us to add our fields to the search. So because I selected case on this little drop down here, do I need to zoom in on that? People at the back need me to zoom in? Yeah, cool. All right. So didn't think of that till just then. Yell out if something like that happens again. Is that better? Yeah. So this little drop down on the side here always starts with your parent object and your entity. And this sliding panel here shows you all the fields that are available on case. And for some reason it's just decided to scroll because that's annoying. Right, there we go. So now I have all the fields that are available on the case entity. So what are some of the ones, I am going to ask you for some information this time. What are some of the fields you think you'd want to search on when you'd be searching for a case?
Case name.
Case name, all right, that's a good one. Case name. So I'm going to pick search criteria here because I can pick whether I want to insert a result. So I'm just going to turn off link. We can talk about link later. Right, case name, search. What else?
Case number.
Case number. Case type, all right. Not subtype, case type. Anything else?
File date.
Sorry?
File date.
Filing date, yeah, good one. Whoops, too far. Status, all right. Status, and I have jurisdiction. Man, this Zoom takes a moment. Alright, that's probably enough for us to get started with. So if I just scroll up a little bit, you can see all those fields now in our search criteria. These are movable, so you can move them around as you need to. So I'm going to just move case type to the top, for example. It's just a drag and drop. And then we've got our other ones there. What about our result columns? What do you think we want to see in our result columns? All the same? Could have said that earlier when I was selecting them. Right, let's go case jurisdiction. And
Question while you're selecting that.
yeah.
That aggregate function, is that what you guys refer to as calculated value?
Yes, sort of. It depends on the type of field you're using. So you obviously can't use it on a string field or something like that, but yeah, you can use it on certain types of number fields.
Okay, so it's not necessarily A plus B kind of calculation, concatenation, or distance through the places.
Yeah, so it's got a various number of uses. I'd probably spend half an hour trying to talking all through the options for you on it. So, but yes, you've basically got the idea.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Case number, case name, filing date, status. Yeah, that'll do for now. We can add more fields later. But that's it. Look at our search form. Really all it is. So we'll go up here, we'll hit run. There we go. There's all our fields there. I'm going to pick a case type of criminal. Here's a bunch of business rules. Some of you have been in my hands-on write your own business rules, recognise some of these cases because they're yours. But there we go. Sort of search form. It really is as simple as that. So somebody said to me just before, defendant name. That's a good idea. The problem with that is that I then have to start introducing table joins because I've got to go from case to parties to persons. And all of a sudden I've got three entities that I have to query on when I'm running that. So the other option you could do is, for those of you in Joe's session, is just write some velocity script that's going to pull that out for me and then display it on the screen. So we can come back and do that later. I'll get to velocity at the end of the session, and if we want to, we can jump back in here and I can show you the velocity to pull out the defendant's name. Anybody got any questions about search forms? Yeah?
What would you like? I was trying to make a search to search on cases that have more than one charge. How would you do something like that?
Cases that have more than one charge.
Like do a count of charges.
Do you want to know the total number of charges, or do you just want to know?
Like if you want to find all cases with two or more charges.
I wouldn't want to do a search that encompasses from the top of case that goes all the way down to charge, because that's traversing too many entities. My search is going to run slow. Okay, getting a little bit technical. The way I would do that is I would build a transient. Does everyone know what transient fields are? Yeah, okay. I'd build a transient that sits on case that calculates the number of charges, just adds them up, and returns a true or false as to whether it's got more than 2 or not. And because that field's on case, I could just add it to my search criteria with a default value of true, and so that it would automatically only filter searches, only filter results that have got that value of true for cases that have got more than 2 charges. Right? And that keeps all my fields on case, so I don't have to start traversing entities to get that information. And transients, because transients are calculated on the fly, I don't have to worry about storing that data persistently in the database. Because let's face it, storing whether a case has got more than 2 charges persistently in a database doesn't actually accomplish much. It's the sort of thing that's much better to just calculate on the fly when you need it. Yeah.
Did you set that transient value exist already, or that's something you would have to?
You would want to create that. I don't think that exists yet. All right, moving on. I'm going to show you an ad form. I was going to build an ad form, but when I dry ran this one, it ended up going for over an hour, so I thought that would be a bad idea. So what we'll do instead is just have a quick look at an ad form, and then I'll walk you through it.
Can I ask a question about the search?
Sure.
So he was asking about charges. What if you wanted to build a search that had, you're looking for cases that have charge A or charge B, but if they have them both, you only want to count them once, right? Like, so I have a case, I have, 500 cases, some have charge A, some have charge B, and some have both, but I only want the search to return it once. Right, I'm putting in 2 different charges, I'm looking for it. Right now, if I did that search, it would return 2 rows.
Yep. I'm not entirely sure. That's a good question. Don't have an answer for you off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'd probably go, my initial thought would be to go down the same path and build a transient that returns that.
Well, I want to be able to do the charges on the fly, right?
No, but the charges are stored in the case, so the transient itself can calculate just to see whether those ones are present or not. Because you obviously have some cases that don't have either of those charges.
Correct,
right?
correct, of course.
Yeah. So if you built a transient that looked to see the presence of one or of those 2 charges and just flipped it true or false, and then just searched on whether it was true or not, that would return you a single result.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
So in that scenario, like we had a similar situation actually, would it be better on the search results to use a script that is actually looking at all the charges, doing a lookup and like displaying all the charges in one column in one field, so that way the case is only there, the charges will all be listed in one?
That would work, but you wouldn't be able to filter by the presence of certain charges. So the question was, if I've got, we've all got a huge statute list, right? Let's say we've got a couple 100,000 statutes or 100,000 statutes.
Right.
If you wanted to just search for the presence of 2 of those, you couldn't do it as a search result. As a result, it would have to be a criteria.
Right, no,
Yeah.
but so let's pretend in this scenario, one of the search parameters would be statute.
Yeah.
But in the search results, statute wouldn't be pointed to the entity or like the specific, it would be like a script that is actually like doing a lookup of everything and listing all the different ones.
You could do that. It would depend on the script you've got, because the thing about doing a script in a search result is that if I do a search and I return a list of 50 results, right, and I've got a piece of complicated script, I've got to run that piece of complicated script 50 times,
I see.
right? So that forces your search to become slow. So you can have script in your search results. I've certainly done it. I know plenty of people that do it, but it will have a negative impact if that script is complicated and needs to do a lot of work. The other disadvantage of that is that the script has to be in velocity language. Velocity is good, it is not as good as the core code or using Groovy in the business rule or something like that. So velocity takes longer to process. So you then start to hit time issues from that as well. Yep. All right. I'm going to look at an add party form. So this is my add party form. It's pretty simple. I've got a party type at the top, which is just a drop down, so defendant, victim, that sort of thing. I've got a person type where I can select whether it's an individual or an organisation. If I select individual, I get a couple of name fields that pop up. If I get an organisation, I get an organisation name that pops up. Then I've got my address panel and some contact information and email and telephone stuff. Pretty standard, nothing too special. let's go and have a look at that form behind the scenes. So here's my add party form. I'm going to scroll down, and here's all my form items that comprise that particular form. So there's a few of them. So you can see at the top here, I've got my party type one. So this form, I should have said, this form has got an entity at the top here, you can see a party. It's an add party form. So I want to build my form object on party, because that's what I'm adding. As soon as I've done that, I had down the bottom here, my party entity was selected, and I've got all the fields. So let's just go through them. So I've got my party type and my person type fields, which relate to these two just at the top here. I've then got my first, middle name and last name fields and my organisation field, with some show ifs attached to it. Are we all familiar with show ifs? Yep, okay, so that's pretty standard. I've then got my address panel, and I've put it in a panel now so that it logically breaks up the form, as I was talking about before. It also looks a little bit better on the screen. I've got a nice little panel here, which is just about address information. The user can collapse it if they want to, and it hides those fields and just keeps it looking a little bit nicer and neater, rather than just having a whole list of fields on the form. Got a couple of default values here for some of those fields. We're familiar with default values as well, I'm guessing? Yep. I've got a couple of spaces. The spaces just give us a little bit of extra padding around it. So I've got a spacer that sits between the name fields and the address information panel. Again, it just creates a little bit of a gap. It's not necessary. We just decided to do it because we wanted to make the form look a little bit better in terms of aesthetics. That's all the only purpose that it serves. And then I've got my contact information down here. I've got my email field, again with another spacer to create some extra space on the screen, some white space, and a nested panel about telephones. If I go back to there, that's pretty much it. So you can see I've just sort of progressively built the form as I go. You start at the top, add in your form items, add in the rest of it, start to apply your shows, apply your default values if you want to, and by the end of it, you've got a pretty basic form and you're good to go. So we've got any questions about add forms?
Widgets into forms.
Custom widgets or core widgets? Either or?
Either or.
Okay. So, this list on the side here down the bottom on the form builder, as I said, mentions all the fields that are currently on party. If you scroll down a little bit, I now have access to entities. So these are the entities that are connected to party. So I've got my standard ones, I've got case and bail and arrests and charges and that sort of stuff. I can keep going down, ask the entities, and then I get to widgets. And you effectively, all you need to do to add a widget, I don't even know which one I'm going to add. Which one needs to be?
Just a widget, where is that?
Come on, this is true. I'm not even touching that thing. And you will know why.
I cannot even find it anywhere. Is it in there?
No, it wouldn't, because this is widgets that are based on party, and the disposition widget isn't based on party. Yeah. Party cross-reference widget, that'll work. So you just add it, much like you do with the normal fields. It's now added this widget onto the bottom of it. When you add a form item, it always goes onto the bottom. I can just click into this, have a bit of a look. There's some parameters down here that I set for the widget. These are all core ones. These just control the behavior of the widget when somebody views it on the form. So I'm not going to go through all of these. Some of them are pretty obvious. But then when you then display it on this form itself, if I hit refresh, I've now got a party cross-reference widget down the bottom. Now, personal pet peeve, when you're editing a form item and you've got a widget, I always turn on no label. Mainly because I hate the fact that it just says party cross-reference on the widget on the left there. I just find that's a waste of space. So I turn off the label, just so it flows a little bit nicer, looks a bit nicer for the user. But that's how you add a widget. It really is as simple as that. Sometimes you can add a widget on a different entity as well. So if I've got an add party form there and I want to add a widget that's on person, I can go from the party to the person entity.
Oh, so like
Yeah, so this is
and your custom widgets would also be listed in there.
correct. Custom widgets appear in exactly the same block.
Okay.
So on the party form here, if I want to add a widget that's on person, or even just a person field, oops, that was the wrong one. Scroll down, go down to my person entity. As soon as I click on person entity, I went to plea offers, pretend I went to person. You start to see all the fields that are available now on that entity. And as you scroll down, you get exactly the same thing. These are the entities that are available to plea offers and all the widgets that are available to plea offers. And you can just add them as form items and build your form out that way. Which, if you scroll up, is how I got person addresses, person first name and last name and so on. I just went into that person entity down the bottom, selected the fields and added them onto the form. And that's how you build a form. Any other questions on add forms?
It's sort of a mixture of add and update forms. If you have, if you are doing something where you're actually like updating like the case, but at the same time like adding conditions, like you have to do a mixture of those. Like what would you start? Like what would be your recommendation?
Conditions, how do you mean? Like bail conditions or something?
Yeah, or like a sentence condition. Or
Yeah.
something like that.
Okay, so you want to update a case and updates.
And add some conditions.
All right.
So it's doing a little bit of both. So like I always like struggle of like should I start with an add form or an update form?
All right. Hold that form.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to jump back to my presentation unless there's other questions. Nope. Okay. All right. So we've built a search form. We've had a look at add forms. Form validation versus form rules. Does everyone know what form validation is? So I'm asking these questions so that I can skip some of this stuff if you all know about it. Right? I've got some shapes and heads. All right. Back to my thing over here. So this is my add party form. I'm just going to get rid of that widget because that's going to be annoying. So if I look at this add party form actually on the screen, you have the ability to add what's called form validation. So validation allows you to add some conditions or checks onto the data that the user has entered to stop them from making silly mistakes or enforcing some rules or conditions where they have to fill out certain fields or you want to throw an error or something like that. So let's just say, for the sake of the argument, this is just a hypothetical, I've got this add party form and you've got a business requirement that says if a person selects a business address type, they have to fill out address 2. For whatever reason, that's just the hypothetical. Where if they select residential, they don't need to fill out address 2. So making the form the field required wouldn't work for us then, because we have to be able to allow null value if they select residential, right? But as soon as they select business, we need to have something in the address line too. So how would we accomplish that? Form validation is the answer. So if we go back to configuring our form, we scroll up to the top, there's a button up here called Add Validation. If we click that, it takes us to a new screen. I haven't got any validations on here, so let's add one. So you have the ability to display either an error or a warning message, that's up to you. I'm going to select error. Now we get to set the message about what we want to display to the user if they encounter this error. So you must enter address 2 for a business address. Spelling is good. Right, hit OK. So now we've got our error message, but now we need to build our conditions. We need to build the triggers that are going to throw this error if it's occurred. So we need to choose a field. So my field was if they select address. These are all the fields that are on the form. So this will actually show you everything that's currently on the form. So I'm going to go to address type. So if the address type is business and address information, address 2 is blank. There we go, done. So I've created a simple form validation. If somebody is trying to fill out this form, they've selected the business as the address type and they've left address 2 as blank, then both of those conditions are going to be true and that error message is going to display and the form will not submit. They will not be able to submit that data. So that's what an error does. An error is a hard stop. They cannot proceed until they fix that error. If I was to change that to warning, it will actually display on the top of the screen as a warning, but then if you save again, it will skip past the warning. So it allows them to still submit that data at the end. So it's basically a soft pass versus a hard stop. That's form validation. Form validation, because as you saw, it's fairly simple in terms of what you can and can't do, it's designed for quick validation checks, something exactly what I just did then. If you've got more complicated validation that you need to perform, something that's fairly in-depth, you need to go and refer to other entities on the case or something like that, you have another button down the bottom here called Form Rules, which will allow you to attach a business rule to it. So you could write your own business rule which does all of those condition checks and logic checks and throws errors and warnings depending on your business logic, and just attach it to this form. So whenever somebody tries to submit this form, it will run that rule and it will check all those conditions for you. All right? So the form rules are designed for the complex ones. Form validation is just when you want to do something quick and nasty and just throw out a validation error. Yeah, form rules, as we just said. Best practices, okay. To your point, short, simple forms are preferable to huge, complex forms. So, how many people here run multiple case types in the system? Yeah, fair few of you, okay. So, let's say you want to build an add document form. What do you think would be best? Building one add document form that works for every case type? Or building 3 add document forms, one specific for each case type? What are we going to go with?
Specific.
Very good, yep. We want to build short, sharp forms. And that would be because, and I'm just going to go out here, let's say your 3 case types are civil, criminal, and family. They're going to have very different requirements about what the information that needs to be on that add document form. So some of them are going to need certain information, some of them aren't. If you could try and build one form that handles the whole lot and then try and use validation checks to make sure that the data they're submitting is correct, but that's increasing the form processing time. Your form's going to take a lot longer to submit. It's also a lot harder to maintain because you've had to do a whole bunch of show-ifs. You know, if the case type is civil, show this field. If it's criminal, show that field. If it's family, show some other field or show a panel. You've now got a huge amount of logic built into your form, which takes it longer to show to display to the user and longer to submit. Whereas if you have 3 very short, sharp forms, one for each of those case types, A, form loads quicker and it submits quicker. You also don't have to worry about breaking it for every other case type if you make a change. In 6 months' time, you've got a business requirement change or legislation change that comes in. You need to collect a new field for the civil type, but not for the criminal and family type. You now need to do a whole bunch of testing because I made one change to that form to cater for this civil thing. Have I just broken all the criminal and family ones as well? Whereas if you've got separate forms, I can add that field onto the civil one. My criminal and my family ones aren't touched. They still work. I don't need to test them. It's all good. So keeping your forms short and simple versus huge complex forms is much more preferable, especially to the performance of the system. Use panels to logically group form items, except searches and headers because they don't use panels. But on your add and update forms, as you saw, having that information in that address panel just made it easier to deal with from a user point of view when they're filling it out, and also from a maintenance or configuration point of view when you're looking at it from the back end. Show-ifs can help with form flow. So you saw on my add party form when I selected an individual person type, I saw the first name, middle name, and last name fields. Whereas if I flick that to organisation, I got the organisation name field. That means the user is only presented with the information they need to fill out. If I had left all 4 of those fields, first, middle, last, and organisation name showing, when they select individual, they would know by training presumably to just go to the organisation name, but why am I even showing them first, middle, and last name? They have no relevance. So use show-ifs to control that sort of flow of your form. The next one is don't overload with form rules. So we just talked about how you can use form rules for some complex configuration on your forms. Don't overload it. Form rules are designed for conditional checks to make sure that the data the user is entering is correct. And maybe you can do a couple of other small things. If you've got to go and set a couple of fields on an entity here or there, that's fine. So short and sharp is what's designed for form rules. If you've got something complicated you need to do, let's say you're adding a hearing as part of an add scheduled event form, and as part of that adding a hearing, you need to then go off and generate some documents that you're going to email out to the clients to notify them about a new hearing on the case. That's not probably something I'd do in a form rule because it has those subsequent processes, generating the document and emailing out to the clients, have nothing to do with the actual submission of that hearing data. Right? All I want to do is get that hearing data into the system. I'll then use a workflow to go off and generate the document, and send out the email, because that's exactly what workflow is designed to do. Handle all those sort of background tasks behind the scenes. You don't have to worry about it. If you have large complex rules sitting on your form takes forever to submit. When somebody hits save, we've all seen it just sits there spinning and you're waiting for a couple of seconds until it goes through, and all your users are complaining that when they hit save, it just takes forever. So keep your form rules as much as you can. I know sometimes you can't. Keep them short and sharp. They want to deal with just the stuff that's related to getting that form into the system, and any subsequent tasks can be handled elsewhere. All right, how are we going for time? Okay. Yeah.
When do you decide to use form validation versus entity validation?
Okay, that's a really good question. Did everyone hear that? When do you use form validation versus entity validation? All right, it's a really simple answer. It's a really complex to put into practice. Form validation is when you want to do checks that are specific to that form. I don't care about, if I'm doing an add document, I say, let's go back to that add party one, all right, where I've added the validation about business for address to. Let's say that was just applicable to civil, all right? So this is a system that was every case type, but I only need to do that check for civil. Even though it's form validation, if you did those sort of things for form, you do that as a form rule. If that was restricted to the civil space, criminal and family didn't have that requirement. Right? So then I'd do it as a form rule because it only applies to the civil form. If you want to apply that to everything, every time somebody enters a party into the system, don't care what case type, if you want to put in that validation check that address to has to be not null when they enter business, you do that as an entity rule. An entity rule affects every time that type of object is accessed in the system. It's all-encompassing. Every time somebody adds a party, that rule is going to run. Versus putting on a form means it's only going to run when somebody submits that form. So it can be a bit of a nightmare trying to distinguish whether something is form-specific or entity-specific. Entity covers your whole system, form rules cover just that form. Does that make sense?
I will give you an example of there were several rules around entities. They were running all the time and they were not applicable to everything. And so like payments from the portal were hitting those rules or validations. They were not applicable to that case tag or whatever, and then they were failing. So be very careful about what you put on the entity rule because it's going to run every time that entity is crashed.
Yeah. A really good example of an entity rule, something that you want to run every single time, is a case number rule. The rule to generate the case number. Whenever you enter in a case, you're always going to want a case number. It doesn't matter what case type it is, you always need that information. So that's a good example of an entity rule. It needs to be run every single time somebody adds a case. So that's a good entity rule. Any other questions about forms before I move on to velocity? Excuse me. All right. Velocity. Yeah, velocity in 15 minutes. This is going to be fun. All right. Excuse me. Velocity is comprised of three things. There's the template engine, which is used for mixing HTML and dynamic data from the database. What does that mean? All right. Wait, am I on the wrong slide? Yeah, I think I'm on the wrong slide. Fantastic. All right. Let's back up from that. Apache Velocity, what is it? It's a template engine. It's designed to give you the ability to present text to the user that's driven dynamically from information in the database. A good example is on your header for your cases. Everyone knows on their header they've got the case number and the case name field, right? Somewhere on the header. Pretty much everyone has that. How do you think we generate that? How do we make that so that the right case number and the right case name shows up on every case that you look at, right? We achieve that via velocity. We don't want to hard code in the case number and the case name because then we'd need a separate header for every single case that you've got. That doesn't make any sense at all. So use something called velocity. And what velocity will do is when that form loads and you've got case number and case name written in there in velocity format, it'll go to the database, dynamically retrieve the case number and the case name for that case, and then display it on the screen. So that's what velocity does. It allows you to display data from the database onto a form for a user to look at. Yep, pretty much what I just said. It also gives you the ability to loop through things. So, how many people here run Prosecutor or have seen Prosecutor? All right. Have you got the header that's got all those alerts that sit across the top, those multicolored alerts? Is that the ones that you guys run? Yeah. So for the people who don't run Prosecutor, in their header, they've got, if there's a whole bunch of different alerts in the system, like person alerts or case alerts or something like that, like confidential statuses and so on, it will display them as a whole bunch of coloured boxes across the header, just more for information and visual purposes. The way they do that is they run a velocity loop through all the statuses and the alerts that are currently sitting on that case, and they just spit them out one after the other up onto the top of the header. So that's what velocity can do as well. You can iterate through a whole bunch of information in your case and use that to display information to the user. It also enables conditional logic, so you can run if statements in velocity. So I can say, if the party type is defendant, I want to show this piece of information. But if the party type is victim, I want to show this piece of information instead. So that can be really handy on folder views when you're building a folder view. If you want to control some of the information that's in the columns, but you don't want to build whole separate folder views for defendants versus victims. You can just use velocity to control the information that is seen. How does it work? This is the bit that I was getting to before where I jumped the slides. So velocity is comprised of three main elements. The first one is the template. This is the bit that you write. So you will sit there and you will write the velocity template, and it's code. It's mixed with HTML and something called velocity code. Who was in any of my Groovy sessions? I recognize some faces. Was most people in my Groovy sessions? Okay. Yep. All right. So you all know about writing code. Velocity is exactly the same. It's just a slightly different syntax. The way velocity works is we've got two main key characters. The hash symbol indicates a command. So that's when I'm telling velocity to go and do something. Here's a command. The $ prefixes objects, and that's where I refer to something in a database. This will make more sense in a second. The second part of velocity is the context. Now, this is provided automatically by the system. You don't have to worry about this, but you do need to know about it. So velocity, every time a screen loads, it's run through the velocity engine. You can take photos if you want, or I've got an email address at the end. You can just email me and I can send you my slide deck as well. So when the form loads and it's displayed to the user, everything is run through the velocity engine. Regardless of whether you've got velocity on the screen in the code or not, it's going to run through it. And it provides some certain context to the velocity engine. Those context objects are $case, because remember, $ prefixes an object. So I've got access to the case object if I'm on a case, and that's referred to by $case. I've got access to the current user that's using the system. So the person who's sitting there in front of the screen doing some work, I know who they are. That's $user. And then I've got $object. This is the object that you're working on. So if you're on an update party form, party is your object, so $object refers to that actual party. So you're updating a defendant, defendant 1, object is that defendant, defendant 1. The third bit is the engine. This is the bit that when the form is finished loading, it runs everything through this engine. It supplies the context. It gives it case, user, and object, and then it looks at the code that you've written and executes that code. Runs it all, generates all the output, displays that on the screen. This is a good example. Does everyone know what a span tag is in HTML? No? Okay, it's a bit of HTML. It's just basically a way of saying this is a short sentence. That's all it is. So span. The case number is, that's a bit of fixed text. So that's always going to appear there. But then I'm calling $case.caseNumber. All right? That's calling the case number for me. So that is dynamically going to go and retrieve the case number field and display it on the screen to the user, whichever case you're on. So you can put that on any field, any form. When you load a case, it's going to display that current case number for you. Right. Syntax basics. I'm keeping this little prefix thing at the top here just for context. Setting a variable. Groovy people know what I'm talking about. Setting a variable can be very handy when you want to refer to that thing many times later on down through your code. And the way it's done is #set. That's my command. I'm setting something. So I've prefixed it with a hashtag. I open a bracket. Variable name is prefixed by a $ because it's an object. So $variable name, and that can be anything you want. You can call it whatever you like. I've just called it variable name. Equals, single equal sign, $case.caseName. Again, referring to case as an object, and the case name field on that object. So what this has done is it's going to go and dynamically retrieve the case name from that particular case that I'm on. It's going to assign it to variable name. Then later on in your velocity code, if you need to print out the case name, you just say $variable name, bang, you've got your case name straight away. So much like the Groovy one for the people who were there, a variable name is just a shortcut that allows you to create a very small shortcut or container to a larger object. Loops. Again, the Groovy people will know all about loops. So loops are a little bit different in terms of their syntax. I have to give it a start and an end. So I'm giving it, my command here to start a loop is for each. So hashtag for each. That's going to start a loop. But I need to tell it what to loop over. All right? It doesn't know natively. So here, I'm going to open my brackets. I'm going to $doc. $sign is my object. It's my document. In case.documents. So what that's doing is it's going to get case.documents, all the documents on the case. Could be 0, could be 10, could be 100. And it's going to iterate through each of those documents, one at a time, one after the other. And it's going to run the piece of code that's between the for each statement and the end statement. In this particular case, I'm just going to print out the name of the document. So the $doc refers to every object that's been iterated. So if I've got a list of 10 documents in my case, as I go through the first one, that's going to be $doc.name. I'm going to go through all that code, get to the end, go back up the top, start my loop again, this time with the second document. And that is also referred to as $doc at the moment. It's forgotten about the first one. $doc is now my second document. And it's going to print out the name again, or whatever code you've got in there. Get to the end of the loop, go back up to the top, start from the third document this time. And that is now also $doc. So this would effectively just print out me the 10 names of my documents in the case. But you can have as much code inside your for each loops as you want. The last one I want to talk about in terms of basic syntax is conditional checks, logic checks. This is where your if statements come in. If something is true, I want you to show this piece of information or show something else. And that's a pretty simple syntax. I've got an if statement, I've got an else if statement, I've got an else, and then an end. And they work pretty much how it would sound. If something is true, show this. If that is false, I'm going to move on to the next bit, else if. Do a check there. If that is true or false, if that's true, I'll run that bit of code. If it's false, I'll move on to the next one. And I'll just go through those steps. So the people who are in the intro to Groovy one, do you guys remember when I said gave that example of I wanted to categorize people on the case based on their age, juvenile, senior, and adult? Does everybody remember that? For the people who weren't here, let's say I've got a whole bunch of parties in the case, and all I want to do is categorize them based on their age. Juvenile, under 18, senior, 65 or over, and the rest of them are adults. Just for random reasons. So, let's start to build that step by step. I'm going to start off by prefixing, building my if statement to start. If the party's age is less than 18, so that's doing a logic check inside that bracket, so it has to return a true or false result. So if the party age is less than 18, I want to print out the word juvenile. My next check that I want to do, else if party age is greater than or equal to 65. So again, inside the brackets, it has to evaluate to a true or false expression. I want to print out the word senior. Right? Now remember, I'm categorizing by I'm grouping by 3 categories: junior, adult, and senior. I've now catered for 2 of those. So I don't need to do an else if check on the third one. I can just do else, right? Because if I haven't met the first one and I haven't met the second one, I'm definitely going to be hitting the third one. That's my if statement. So if I'm less than 18, if my party's age was 16, I'm going to print out the word juvenile. Now it's important to note, much like with Groovy, same with velocity, inside those brackets, my little conditional check, party age is less than 18, it will stop running on the first true one. So as soon as it finds the first one is true, that whole block stops running. It will never iterate through the rest of them. So if I've got a party that's age 16, I'm going to print out juvenile and I'm going to stop there. I'm not even going to run the rest of these checks. So that's important to note when you're building one of these if-else if statements. That's velocity in a nutshell. Oh, sorry, question. Thanks, Jim.
So you can party dot age and then party age, is there a reason for that?
Yeah, that's called a typo. Thank you. Hi, recording. Yes, I made a typo. Moving right along. Where do we use velocity? It's often used in search results. Sorry, question.
What's the syntax of break a loop? Is there a syntax for that velocity?
Yep. So, did everybody hear that question? What's the syntax for breaking a loop? It's really complicated. It's a command, so you prefix it with hashtag, and then you write the word break. Yep. Actually, I'll actually just add something to that. What version of eSeries are you on?
What's that?
What version of eSeries are you on?
Just whatever the latest release is.
Okay, so if it's one of the later releases, you actually want to do hashtag break with an empty brackets at the end of it, just around brackets. You can get by with just break, but it's actually better to use the empty brackets. The older versions will use just break. Alright, velocity. Where do we use it? Search results. So people who were in Joe's one earlier saw him do that with a case number or the case name field in the search results. It's really good for formatting some of your search results and displaying extra information to the user where you don't want to have to add in a whole bunch of fields. So if I want to display concatenated party name, I want to show first name, middle name, and last name. I could put all three of those search result fields onto my search form, or I could just put a static piece of text which just combine them all together. Headers and folder views. For anyone who's looked at a header form, yeah, it's pretty much all velocity. Most headers are just pure velocity. Yep. If you want to learn how to write velocity, a header is a really good place to start. This is an example of some stuff that you might want to put into your header. So I'm doing a check. If the case status is confidential, then I want to apply some HTML which says the word confidential. So span is my little HTML tag that says here's a short sentence. I'm applying some style, which is color red. You have to worry about the HTML, that's easy to look up. Then I'm using the word confidential and I'm closing my span. Then I'm ending my if statement with a hashtag. So what this will do is if you put this in your header, every time somebody looks at a case, it's going to look at the case status field. If it's equal to confidential, I'm going to display the little red confidential word. Sure.
Is the case status in this case case sensitive?
Yes, so the status is the field that's on the case, and that will be case sensitive, yes. So if I had S with a status with a capital S, that wouldn't pick it up. You can use it on add and update forms. It's less used on these ones. You usually use it on add and update forms if you want to display some information or some help text to a user. Or you just want to supply some information about, for example, you may have an add party form and for whatever reason you want to display the case number or the case name at the top of the add party form or something like that. You could just use a piece of velocity to just display the information on them. It's less used on those guys, but it certainly can be used. The upshot is that velocity allows us to present data in a more flexible way without having to put on a whole bunch of fields onto our form. It gives us flexibility in how we display information and what we display. But that's pretty much it. As I said, velocity, a header is a really good place to start. They can be very complicated. Does everyone know about the velocity test page? Some people do, some people don't. Let me just jump out to here. So it will change depending on your configuration, but there'll usually be an option in the left nav, and I can't remember where it is, called Velocity Test Utility. Or it might be just called Velocity, or Velocity Test Page, or something like that. You can go into this one. You can give it an object. So remember when I talked about the velocity context engine? It had to have context. So you had to give it a case or a party. So I can give it a case. I can give it an ID of 26. And I can go and not make a typo. And I can just run a test. That's going to give me the case number. Zoom in first a little and see that. So the velocity text editor allows you to test some velocity, write it out, check how it's going to work. Again, grab sections out of your header, throw them in there, run the tests by giving it a case object, and start to see what it does. And then you can start to pull apart the bits and pieces in your header and make more sense of it. So that's how you gain knowledge now. Just by testing it and testing out your code, finding some existing velocity code in your on your folder views or your headers, and plugging into here and seeing what happens. That's pretty much it in terms of what I was going to show. Oh, we have run late on time. I guess we're doing questions between. Any other questions people have got? Something they want me to show? Yes?
Do you
That's a really good point. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, transits don't work on search criteria, do they, John? No. So yeah, I gave you guys a bum steer on that. Sorry about that. Yeah, they do work on the results.
Results, it's not on the criteria.
To the two people who asked those questions about that one, I don't have a good answer for you straight off the bat. That's something I'd probably want to think about because it's a little outside of the box in terms of what we would normally do in a search. There would be a way to do that. I just have to think about it a little bit more. So you can reach out to us at products. Just give me a couple of days to get home and relax. You can reach out to us at products@genetech.com and or talk to the support team, and they should be able to point you in the right direction. So,
is there a difference on form? There's the add static text, but then for the widget inside of each entity, it's a static text widget. Is there really any difference between those two?
not
Is
that,
one better than the other one for speed or?
not that I'm aware of. Sorry, I'm going to point to Joe here. Joe?
The widget was created because it's kind of explicit because you give it a path, right? So you're not talking about the context. You know the context because of the path. The static text is kind of weird. The context is based on the position of the
Anything else? Did everybody understand that one? Because it took me a couple of seconds. Yeah? People didn't understand it? All right. So,
I didn't hear it, to be honest.
right. So the question was, what's the difference between using the static text widget, because the label is a widget, versus just adding a static text form item onto the form and writing something into it? So the static text form item, if you just add that, the object or the context of that thing is based on the position of where it is in the form or the form object. Right? So that's how when you run it through the engine, that's how it understands what the context is. If you use the widget, the context is based on the path you've used. So if you were to pick parties.person static text widget, it will use person as its object. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. So that's how you can, if you needed to do, if your form object was an add party, and you just wanted to add some party information, you could just add the static text. But if you wanted to add something that was velocity context specific on an entity that's buried deep, it might be better to just use that static text widget so that it works off of that entity there. Any other questions? Yes?
General question. I see recording equipment. Are you going to be able to watch all these later?
For a charge of $1 million. Yes, they will be. So it may take a little while because I'll obviously have to do some editing on the videos, but my understanding is that they will be made available after the conference.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have a random question. So adding those forms to the navigation, sometimes if it's not related to the case, you have to use like a URL in the navigation rather than the insert or update
Yes.
selection.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly that. Anyone else? All right. Last session. Thanks everyone.